This is the second part of a 2-episode mini-series on trust and divorce. And just as a reminder, in the first episode, I referred to an article that came in September of 2021, was published then by marriage.com, titled The 10 Most Common Reasons for Divorce. And in that, in these 2 episodes, I'm correlating each one of those 10 reasons for divorce to trust, or more specifically, to distrust. Last week, in the first part, I covered 5 of those reasons. This week, I'm going to cover the other 5. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? Just as a reminder, the 5 that I covered last week, the 5 causes for divorce, were 1, infidelity, 2, financial trouble, 3, lack of communications, 4, constant arguing, and 5, weight gain. Now I'll talk about number 6, unrealistic expectations. The article did not give, or the research that the article was based on, did not give any specific percentage of what percentage of marriages fall apart or divorces are due to unrealistic expectations, but you can see where they're coming from. The unrealistic expectations, the first component I would correlate this to would be personality compatibility. We have different expectations. We expect different things. As long as those things are, again, if I go back to the personality compatibility component of the relative trust model, the different components of that personality compatibility can be at the very high level, which I would call universal or absolute, which have to be exactly the same. We have to be on the same page, or go all the way down to just be different, be the same, or even be complementary. And in some things, my wife and I, for example, and I mentioned it last week, I'm going to mention it again today, that this coming April, we're going to celebrate 30 years of marriage. And we're not identical. We're not the same in everything. But where we're not the same, we are either complementary or we're different in a way that doesn't bother each other. So not everything that I do, my wife likes, or not everything that I expect, she expects. But those expectations are not unrealistic, and they're not conflicting with each other. So unrealistic expectations, I would call an under-exploration of personality compatibility. By the way, the biggest thing that I found that has the correlation, the biggest factor on trustworthiness or trust, is shared values. Have we explored our values? And you know, this might even get to politics if we really care strongly about politics and it ranks really high in our relationships or in our view of the world. If we rank politics, if both of us rank politics very high, but we're on opposite direction, especially with the level of political polarization and the rhetoric that we get from the extremes in both parties, that could be an issue. That could possibly lead to divorce. But in general, it's things that are incompatible. Again, I'm not saying that things that are different, because we're different. My wife and I are different in many ways. In some ways, even ways that are important, we are compatible because we are complementary. And in other areas, we're compatible because we just don't care about those incompatibilities. And in other areas, we're just the same. But we don't have any strong areas where we expect really different things and we have an issue with the other person expecting something else. Now, the cause for this goes back to the model, and that's time and intimacy, and simply that we did not discuss enough our personality compatibility. If you remember, the relative trust model is made of 3 components under the category of who you are and 3 components under the category of what you do during an interaction with the other side to that relationship. And often the unrealistic expectations is a reason of just not discussing it enough. I don't know who you are enough, and I have not spent enough time and asked enough questions and answered enough of your questions to really know who you are and for you to know who I am before we got married. Now, I have to admit that my wife and I believe we dated about 6 months before we got married. And in some cases, that's short. That's not a lot of time. But the level of intimacy, and again, I'm not talking about the intimacy I'll talk about in the next reason, but the level of intimacy in our conversations and the amount of time that we spent was enough for us to really know who we are. And plus, we were fortunate enough to be highly personally compatible or have a highly compatible personalities. So unrealistic expectations really causes personality incompatibility, which leads to trust, one of the major reasons to lead to distrust. And the reason is not enough time and intimacy at the front end before we got married to know whether our personalities are compatible or not. The next component is lack of intimacy. Not the 7th reason that quoted by the article in marriage.com is lack of intimacy. And in intimacy here, I think they are implying not enough sex. And I believe it or not, but I am going to talk about that. And it's not enough sex, but it's probably broader than that. And it's not enough intimacy the way I talk about intimacy in the relative trust model. And that spending more time with each other face to face in person. But it's actually even the physical intimacy. And here's how physical intimacy is going to relate. In 2004, Paul Zak did a study, and he actually turned that study into a very successful TED Talk. In that study, he took 194 participants. If I remember correctly, they were students. And what he did was he gave them, it's actually a spray that you get through your nose, 24 IUs or units of oxytocin. It's a hormone that typically is generated by a gland in our brain, the hypothalamus. Half of them got those 24 units of oxytocin. Half of them got placebo. So they didn't know which one is getting any participant. None of the participants knew if they're getting oxytocin or a placebo that has no effect. Then they were asked to play the trust game. And the trust game is a game where, one of the participants gets a certain amount of money, needs to decide how much of it to give the other side. Whatever they decide to give the other side, the bank triples it. So the other side will get 3 times the amount that the first side decided to give. And then they can give some back. This time it doesn't get tripled. So why is that a trust game? Because when you give, you can decide, let's say that we're talking about $100, you get $100, you can decide how much you're going to give the other side. You can decide, you know what, I'm going to keep everything to myself, giving them nothing. Nothing times 3 is still nothing. You don't care how much they're going to give back because they don't have anything to give back. You keep the $100. The most efficient game is when the first party decides to give the other party $100, the entire amount, the entire $100. When you give them the entire $100, they actually get $300 because the bank triples it. The only problem is that now you're left with nothing other than trusting the other side to give some of it back. Obviously, the most fair game is going to be if the first one gives most fair and effective is going to be if the first one decides to give 100 to the other side gets 300, gives the first side 150 back. Now we each have 150. I have 50% more than I had before I gave 100 to the other side. But you have to trust them. So they looked at the results, and what they found was that those who got oxytocin originally gave 18.5% more to the other side. The median was actually 25% more. So if I decided to give, I don't know, well, not $100 because I can't give 25% more if I only got $100. But if I got, let's say, $40, if on average it would have been $40, then those with oxytocin would typically give $50, 25% more. Here's the amazing thing. 45% of those who got oxytocin gave the other side everything, which was 117% higher than those that did not get oxytocin and got the placebo. So, the conclusion is obviously that oxytocin increases the level of trust. Except that we're not sure that it increases trust or your willingness to take risk and lose those $100 or whatever you got. So they did a second experiment. In the second experiment, the other person, which we would call the trustee, the person that we need to trust, was actually not a person. It was a computer, and the decision of how much they're going to give back was completely random. And you knew that it was random. What that means is now you're taking pure risk. Now it's not a matter of trust anymore. It's just a matter of how much risk I'm willing to take. That computer, I don't know how much it's going to give me back. So now we isolated trust out of the equation to stay with risk. In that game, there was no statistically significant difference between those who got oxytocin and those who got placebo. What that tells us is that oxytocin did not affect risk-taking profile, but it affected your willingness to trust the other person. So oxytocin leads to trust. Now, I haven't seen, neither from Paul Zak or anybody else, a research that actually says these many units would lead to this amount of extra trust, except, we can say 24 units led to, 18.5% to 25% to whatever the number is, higher investment, therefore higher trust. So I looked up, you're still thinking, what is that related to intimacy? Well, I looked up an article from Psych Central, one of the leading psychology magazines, in 2018, and this is a direct quote from that article. In humans, oxytocin is thought to be released during hugging, touching, and orgasm in both genders. In the brain, oxytocin is involved in social recognition and bonding and may be involved in the formation of trust between people and generosity. So Paul Zak in his study already confirmed or correlated oxytocin with trust. But how do you create trust? Hugging, touching, and orgasm. In other words, intimacy. So oddly enough, that intimacy, that physical intimacy of hugging, touching, and orgasm increases trust. Lack of intimacy or lack of those physical intimacy components reduces trust. And therefore, that's probably why they found that it's a factor that leads to divorce. The eighth reason for divorce was cited as lack of equality by the article. And lack of equality, I mean, it really lends itself to the symmetry component of the relative trust model. The symmetry component, how does lack of equality in a marriage manifest itself? Well, one of us is contributing more. One of us is working harder. By the way, working harder doesn't have to be working a job harder. It can be doing the dishes. I have to do the dishes all the time. I have to do laundry all the time. I have to take care of this all the time. You're not taking care of any of those. That's a lack of symmetry or lack of equality as named in the article. It could be a lack of symmetry in getting more. I buy myself more stuff than I allow you to buy. I always get the better car. You get a second best car in the family. You always get the second best car in the family. I have to say, I'm thinking about the cars that we have and had in the past. And I don't think that there was any point in time where we could say that one of them is better or worse than the other. I think that in terms of the amount of money that we spent on cars, we spent just about the same amount of money on both our cars. The cars were very different. I mean, for a very long time, I loved driving BMWs while my wife loved driving the full size, the extra full size SUVs. They just about cost the same, at least the BMWs I bought and the full size SUVs that she had. But so it doesn't have to be the same car, but it has to feel like they're equal. So this is a car is only one example. How much do we spend on ourselves? How much do we go out for food and so on? So that's part of symmetry. And I told you before that in one of my experiments, I found that when the gaps are bigger, I should say it the other way around. When trust is lower, the gaps are 7.2 times bigger. And so obviously when the gaps are bigger, trust is lower. It plays into the component of fairness, which is one of the major components, subcomponents of symmetry. But I want to touch on another thing, and that is the shame being felt by the person who's contributing less or taking more. And I'll tell you, when I started this business, in the first 2.5 years, was actually making less than my wife was making. I never had a problem in the first, 17 years we lived in the U.S., or it's actually more than 20 years that we've been married. I never had a problem when I made more than her. I never felt that there was less of equality because I really attributed a lot of value to what she did for our marriage and our home and our daughters. I actually felt bad more when she contributed more, and in the first 2.5 years of my business, when I contributed less, I felt shame. And I felt less of equality, and it was my fault and was lack of symmetry. I don't know how many people would divorce their partner because they themselves contribute less or take more and feel shame, and because of that want a divorce. But it's part of the lack of equality, and I can see that happening. The 9th reason quoted by the article at marriage.com is the not being prepared for marriage. And actually they claim, or the research that the article was based on claimed, that this was a reason for 75% of divorces, not being prepared for marriage. And I think that not being prepared for marriage has several aspects. One of them is I'm not prepared to marry you, versus I'm not prepared to be married to whoever that is. I kind of covered the first one on not being prepared to marry you, in that we did not spend enough time and intimacy, two components of the relative trust model, to get to know each other and to know that we're personally compatible. So here I brought in the personality compatibility component as well. So it could be that. It could be that we're not prepared because we haven't spent enough time. We don't know each other. And as a result, we get married and then we start finding things out. But I talked about that more under another component in the previous episode last week, the first part. I'm going to talk about a second part, and that is, and I see that a lot when I see whether it's friends of mine getting their kids married or younger people getting married. I got married in an older age. In fact, I'll tell you how we decided to get married. I mean, we were walking down the street one day after knowing each other for about 3 months, not more than 3 months. And we were walking down the street hand in hand, and it kind of came into the conversation. So what do you say we get married? I mean, it wasn't the what you see today. I mean, I see so many pictures that focus on the symbolism. That I would rent a plane that would fly with a sign that says, "Will you marry me?" And or get on the big screen during a football game, get on one knee, have that ring. And so I never bought my wife a ring. I mean, I paid for rings, but I think one thing in our, and this is part of our personality compatibility, that I know that she has her taste and she's going to get hers. In fact, the only time one of us, I'm not even going to say decided on a ring or any type of jewelry for the other, was my wife deciding, and again, it wasn't really deciding, but what wedding ring I should wear. And it started with, we decided to get married, and she went to a jewelry store. And our tastes are kind of, I'm not going to say identical, but very close. So she found a ring for herself. The ring was made of titanium and gold. Frankly, I don't think that it was the symbolism of how strong of an element, a metal, titanium is, as she just liked it. She liked the design. It was a different design. Her focus was not on the symbolism. And then she saw another ring made of titanium and gold, which she thought I would like. And so she actually came to me and said, Yoram, I want you to keep an open mind, which is always a bad start for a conversation. But she said, I want you to keep an open mind. I saw a ring that I think you're going to like. So I went with her to the jewelry store. She showed me the ring that I would be wearing. I looked at it and I said, you know what? I like it. Now, was it the best ring I ever saw? Was it what I would choose for myself? I don't know. What I do know is I looked at it, I like it. It's been probably 30 years since we bought that ring, both rings, and we still have those rings. And, I don't wear my wedding ring much. Don't look for any reasons why I do that. But when I do, that's the ring that I wear. So I see a lot of young couples focused on the symbolism of getting married, of the proposal itself, of the she said yes, of the balloons and of the fireworks and the plane with the sign and the place where we're going to get married and so on. We got married ended up being a very nice place, but we got married. The budget was a big part of it, and we found a place that to get us married the time we wanted to get married, and for the budget we wanted to get married at, we were one of the first couples in Israel to get married on a Friday at noon. And that was unheard of, and we were one of the first ones. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually were the first ones. And we did that for budget reasons. We liked the place, and that was within our budget. The focus was not on the symbolism. Do we celebrate our birthdays and our anniversaries? We do, but not to the extent that some other people do. And so I think that not being prepared for marriage could be because we focus more, or many focus more on the symbolism of marriage, on the concept of marriage, than actually who you're marrying. The last and 10th reason the article at marriage.com gave for why people divorce, or the research underneath it, and there was no percentage associated with it, is physical and emotional abuse. Do I need to tell you that if one partner to the marriage abuses the other part, either physically or emotionally or both, that not only that it's a good cause for divorce, but also that it's a good reason for distrust? I'm going to guess that I don't need to tell you that, but I'll tie it to the model anyway, because physical and emotional abuse obviously impact positivity or specifically negativity. It's either one of those has a very negative impact in every interaction. Every interaction with the partner that ends up or includes physical or emotional abuse is one that reduces trust, increases distrust, rather than increases trust. So it kills trust. There is this symmetry. Physical and emotional abuse is typically one way. One member, one partner in, I think even the word partner is too much to describe someone who physically or emotionally abuses the other person, the other member of that marriage. But typically it's a one-sided thing, and therefore symmetry is out the wall. We're not on the same side. We're on opposite sides. You're on the abusing side. I'm on the abused side. So symmetry obviously is hurting. Personality compatibility. I mean, unless you tell me that the other side to the abuse enjoys the abuse and therefore they are complementary, which I would highly doubt that you're going to be able to find me a couple like that, where one is the abuser, the other likes to be abused, and therefore they're compatible. That's a major incompatibility, being abused, either physical or emotional. So that's another reason. I guess the only point here is to ask whether physical and emotional abuse is a cause for distrust and therefore a cause for divorce, or that physical and emotional abuse are reasons for both distrust and divorce independently. I don't know. We can argue that, and it really doesn't matter, because they're leading to both, to a loss of trust and to divorce. This is the end of this two-part, two-episode series on marriage or divorce specifically, and trust or distrust, where I kind of took this article from marriage.com, and I'm going to give you the link here because it's a link that's not hard to relay without writing it. It's www.marriage.com/advice/10-most-common-reasons-for-divorce. Or 10 most common reasons for divorce, with dashes between every, and 10 is in numbers, the number 10, 10. So this is how I built on this article and correlated all 10 reasons based on a research of 4,000 divorced couples, based on research that was done. And I correlated all of those 10 factors, 10 reasons to trust. And I really do believe that distrust is really the reason for divorce. And that those 10 reasons, 10 causes, are 10 causes for distrust. And because of distrust, there's divorce. I typically talk about trust in the context of the workplace, in the context of human resources. And I kind of took a journey to talk about something that has absolutely nothing to do with the work and the workplace. And I'm going to guess that every now and then I'm going to take those journeys and apply the trust model, the trust habits framework to other areas than work. What would you like to know about trust and trustworthiness? Let me know and I'll answer it in a future episode. I would love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@thetrustshow.com. If you like this episode, subscribe to the show so you will automatically get notified when I release a new episode. Rate it. Write a review for this podcast because those ratings help not only you, but also others looking for podcasts just like this. If you're looking for more resources to learn about how to build trust, be trusted, or know who to trust, look up my workshops, online courses, books, or go to my website, trusthabits.com. And remember that the answer to these two questions will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? And can you trust me? Thank you for listening or watching The Trust Show.